to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. She is the author of the new book, Everything I Hope For, no other than Miss Cinda Gault. Welcome to Book 101 Review, Miss Cinda. And can you please introduce more about yourself?
Sure, Daniel. It's great to be here. I am a Canadian writer with a PhD in English, so I have taught many other writers in my career, and I have also written across a number of genres. And the most recent genre I've been writing in is historical fiction, and this book, Everything I Hope For, is my third. And the first two were set in the 19th century Canadian wilderness, one in 1885 and one in 1806. Obviously, I didn't live then, so I had to research those times to know what the world was like. But in this third one, it's set in the 1970s in Toronto, and I did live through those times. So it's more of a personal and emotional journey through those times as the backdrop and as the times that affect you as you're living them. I have noticed a theme in my work in all three of these books is that I seem to write about women who have unconventional adventures for their times, and they don't let that hold them back. They take whatever repercussions are in store and insist on living meaningful lives for themselves. And that is as relevant to journeys that are geographic journeys like the first two, or to social journeys, which is like the most recent one.
Miss Cinda Gault, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And hoping for more and more empowering books like this to come. So let's talk about life in the 1970s, which is associated to your new book. Tell us, what is life in the 1970s?
Okay, the life of the 1970s was a very turbulent time socially. I started my story in 1972, and this was still a time that was feeling the effects of the change in the Divorce Act of 1968 in Canada. And the divorce rate skyrocketed after that time. So it did for a number of years before it settled down again. And it was a transformational time for women in particular because, number one, you had the birth control pill. So women had the ability to control whether they had children or not. It was mass produced, and young women had this ability that they had never had before to be able to reliably control their own reproduction. And you also at the same time had Henry Morgentaler going through his court cases. You probably recall at the time, Henry Morgentaler was a doctor who brought the nation to its knees about abortion law. And it's because of him that the Supreme Court knocked down the abortion law. And Canada is now the only Western country that does not have an abortion law. So during those times, women were feeling a big surge of autonomy that suddenly the world opened up to them and they could do whatever they wanted. Another thing, one of the things that they did was to go to school, to post-secondary education, and they did so in droves. And you had women also going out to work, and they not only did work that had previously been women's work, they were able to go and do work that women had not been allowed or done before. For example, and this is where I was drawing from my own experience, the character becomes a prison guard in a men's prison. And so that's the kind of work that women were going off and discovering they could do. So my character is Belinda Pompey, and she's 17, and this is where she comes into the 1970s as a young woman who is just coming of age and falling in love with somebody who her family and the rest of the world does not seem to be appreciative of. And the backlash that she experiences from that shocks her, and it becomes what forms her for the rest of the story.
Miss Cinda, if you had to describe the overall mood or energy of the 1970s, what would it be? How did it feel different from the idealism of the 1960s and the ambition of the 80s?
I would say that there was much excitement in the 1970s, especially among women. For example, I was going to university at the time at the University of Guelph, and I and a number of other fellow students who were women got together and formed a group called, it was at a university club called Women in Crisis. And we organized to set up a rape crisis center at the time. And I became the first director after that to set up a shelter for victims of domestic violence. And we did that as university students, as a university club. And that agency now still is going in Guelph. It's under a different name, but it was this idea that you could go out and you could actually affect your world. We would, the sexual assault laws changed at the time as well because of women like me going and talking to the Crown Attorney of at Guelph and arguing that laws needed to be changed so that there would be more convictions, that sort of thing. So there was a great deal, specifically among women, of excitement during those times.
The 1970s are often called the mid decade. From your perspective, did the feel true? Was the cultural shift towards introspection and self focus?
Well, it's funny that you talk about the me generation. The 60s have also been talked about as the me generation. I don't know really what people mean by the me generation that makes it a bad thing. I mean that you are looking at what's important to you and going out into the world and learning about it and becoming good at whatever that is. I don't know that being focused on me is a bad thing. Um, the 1960s were more to do with the beginnings of something, you know, the beginnings of rock and roll, the Beatles, that sort of thing. And there was that specific kind of excitement. But I think by the 70s, it actually affected people's daily lives in what they could do because so much was opening up as far as opportunities for how women could organize themselves, what they could imagine for themselves in their own futures, how they could control what happened to them, you know, reproductively. So if that's me, I think that was very exciting to be thinking about me for a change.
Definitely. What is the most surprising or jamming cultural change you witnessed unfold over the course of the decade did you include to your book?
Uh, well, there are a number of things that happened to Belinda during this book. It's an unconventional plot in the book because one would expect that at the time in one's life when everybody is reacting against whoever is chosen, like it was the long-haired unemployed hippie, that was kind of the symbol of the times as being everything that one would have a backlash about, and Belinda chooses this kind of a character. So her family responds badly, and you would expect there would be one of probably three conventional plots that would go with this. One would be the Romeo and Juliet plot, that this was true love, it ended up being quashed, and it was tragic for both of them. That's not where this plot goes. The second would be that the young woman goes out, makes her mistakes, and then comes back home, older and wiser, to her room where all the little knickknacks are still on the shelves and her stuffed toys are still on the bed, and she's now going to lead a more conventional life. That doesn't happen in this book either. The family blows up while she's away, which is indicative of the times because divorce was such a big thing at the time. Or the third would just be that the world crushes her, like a more naturalist kind of story where she cannot find her own way in the world because the world is just too big and powerful. That also does not happen in this story. So what we see is a more unconventional story of watching the main character go through all of these things that happened in the 70s, these cultural pressures in the 70s, and watch her sort of take her own consequences and by the same token make her own decisions and see where she goes with that.
Interesting, Miss Cinda. Truly, truly interesting in the 1970s. The Vietnam War was the Watergate scandal dominated the news. How did these events change the average American's trust in their government and institutions?
Well, you're asking a Canadian this question. So during those times, one thing that was the case in Toronto was that a lot of draft dodgers came here. So we were, we certainly watched the news on TV like everybody else did, but we were not involved in the war. So it was a different experience for Canadians. But many young men came to Canada and found lives here because they decided they would be objectors. So that's one thing. Another thing, certainly the student movement that was a big part of the U.S. Zeitgeist at the time affected Canadian youth. I think it was more politically oriented in the States because of the Vietnam War, and you had young people who were fighting against their own involvement in it and also what they thought was an immoral war. In Canada, nobody had to worry about going to war. So it was more of a values-oriented student protest time where people were sort of the sympathies were changing, where you didn't want to be like your parents. You didn't want to be living a life that was prescribed for you, but you wanted to live one that was more meaningful to you personally. And I suppose that's where the me generation aspect of it would come in. But for Canada at the time, Canada was kind of in love with itself at the time. In my PhD, I did my thesis on the years 1965 to 1980. And those years were not only characterized by the women's movement, the second wave women's movement, but also by the Trudeau years, Trudeau senior years, and the kind of feel good about being Canadian kind of nationalism that Pierre Trudeau represented at the time. And so you had Canadians wanting to discover themselves about being Canadians. There were lineups of young people hitchhiking out the Canada One Highway to go across Canada and get to know who we were as a nation and what our country was like. And you had young people going all over the place wanting to discover it. And Pierre Trudeau made people feel like it was an exciting place to be. And they wanted to talk about it. So that's a very different vibe than what was happening in the States, even though you had a very similar, the dress, the best bell bottoms, the music, all of that sort of thing was very similar between the two countries. But their politics are very different at the time.
Different politics for sure. And Miss Linda, the Cold War was constant backdrop. How palpable was the fear of a nuclear war, and how did it compare to the fear people live with during the Cuban Missile Crisis or the 1980s?
Well, this is also a very American concern at the time because these were American issues. The Americans were the ones who were doing something about that. That wasn't the case with Canadians, and I wouldn't say that. I remember in the 60s and 70s, people saying, "Oh, I'm not going to have kids because we've got an overpopulated world."
Yes.
And I don't want to contribute to that. Well, that turned out to be wrong, and I don't. The concern about nuclear war, I mean, that's the sort of thing that has been there as a backdrop. And some people cared about that at the time. There was also very much a back to the earth movement among a subset of people. These were the kind of hardcore hippies who wanted to go off and live in communes and that sort of thing. But to most people, we were the boomers, and that was a huge generation. We grew up lining up for things because we were such a big generation. Our mothers had an average of 3 kids, where my generation had an average of 2. So that's why you have the millennials being a smaller generation. And our mothers were the generation of the 50s housewives that did not like being restricted to just being wife or mother, which most middle-class women were at the time. So they inspired their daughters to want more. And the wanting more is what happened in the 1970s. But that was more on their minds than nuclear war at the time. They were much more focused on sort of a burgeoning world as both being women and being Canadians, that it seemed like opportunities were opening up for them. They did not stay up at night worrying about uh, larger things that affected them tangentially through our neighbors. We more felt a solidarity with American youth over things like dress and hair length and music.
Miss Cinda, without the internet, smartphones, or even answering machines, how has communication and information gathering fundamentally different? What do you miss about that?
Well, it's interesting that you would mention that because the first novel that I wrote was a Harlequin super romance called Past Convictions, and that was published in 1988. And I have recently gotten the rights back for that book so that I could publish it again with my current publisher, Grey Goose Press. And so I had the opportunity to go through something that had been written, well, that was written in the 80s. And I had to change many things about it to update it because I had phone booths and I had tape recorders and I had, technology that was of the 70s. There were no computers, there were no cell phones. When I wrote that manuscript, I typed it out on a portable typewriter. So I don't have an electronic copy of the manuscript. And my millennial kids had to teach me about the technology that is image to text so that I didn't have to retype the whole thing, that I could just do that again. So the interesting thing that came out of that process, though, was how dramatically technology has changed, but the love story really didn't. It is surprising how much that stood the test of time. So yes, you have technology fundamentally changing how we communicate with each other, but what we have to communicate is still very human. And there's something about being human that transcends a lot of time.
Transcend for sure. So, Miss Cinda, as an author, what are your short term and long term goals?
Well, I one of the you talked about surprises earlier. One of the surprises to me about being a writer is how much time you have to spend promoting your work. I am with an indie publisher. I'm with a small publishing company, and so I figured that came with the territory. But I understand even writers who are published by big box publishers, that authors need to learn how to be marketers now. So that's something that I'm sure I'll be doing in the future. I also will be continuing to write, hopefully inspiring stories. And I also will find it very interesting. I have two granddaughters who were born in 2023. So I brought up two boys, and each of those boys had a girl. And so I will be part of that generation as they grow up to find everything they hope for as young women in another generation.
Good luck to your goals, Miss Cinda, and looking forward for more success. What will be your piece of advice for those people out there who want to be an author like you?
Well, I get asked this question a lot, and I have a few things to say about it. First of all, there's a difference between wanting to be a writer, or wanting to be an author, and wanting to write a book. I often say to people, if you want to be an author, you have to really, really want to do this. There are three things. If you have to really, really want it, if you want to be an author, have a kid or do a PhD, because these take many, many, many years of becoming good at something. So you can't just do it because you want to write a book. If you want, they say everyone has a story in them, and I think that's very true. Everybody does have a life and a story to tell. If it's that story you want to tell, then that's not wanting to be a writer. That's wanting to write a book. And if you want to write a book, you could hire a ghostwriter, for example, because the structure learning how to actually write a book. You can learn to write a book. You can't learn how to make it interesting, but you can learn how to write one. So if you want to write a book, it's a very different thing. If you want to become a writer, you need to be prepared to develop your craft over a long time. I mean, saying that everybody's got a book in them is kind of like saying everybody's got a heart surgery in them. You have to train for a long time to get good at something. But if you want to become an author and you find the actual process of writing deeply meaningful and pleasurable, and you're doing it because of that, then I applaud you in wanting to do it. I also think it's worth saying that don't underestimate how important being a reader is. Not everybody has to write to be part of that conversation that is kind of the magic that happens between a reader and writer through a story. People are reading less in these times, and it is a very special thing to be a sensitive reader, a perceptive reader, and one that is able to articulate how to analyze a story. So you could also get very good at being a reader, and you could bring yourself out into the public in doing that, in talking about books and analyzing them at a deep and knowledgeable level.
Well, thank you for that advice, Miss Cinda. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
Well, I would say one of the best Canadian writers who I have admired and I studied during my PhD is Margaret Lawrence. And she wrote, among other things, a cycle of novels called the Manawaka Cycle. And it starts, the novel that I fell in love with, was called The Stone Angel, because the main character is a gloriously vibrant character. She has a lot of flaws, but she is a very powerful voice. And I very much admired those books. It ended with The Diviners. And if anybody is interested in looking up Margaret Lawrence, you would be able to find her quite easily.
Thank you for that recommended book, Miss Cinda. And before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast, people, my other podcast, because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too, comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well, geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast, Law 101 and Mental Health 101, Love Letters in its fourth season, as well as my movie 101 review and music 101 and science 101 and sex 101 in its first season. Please listen to them wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Cinda, for a young person today, what is the most important thing to understand about what is really like to live through that unique decade?
Well, I suspect that a lot of people now have parents who are boomers, who uh, lived their young lives in very different circumstances. Many things that I hear about growing up now is how isolating it feels. And while teenagerhood has always been a time of feeling like you're not like anyone else, or you're feeling isolated, um, uh, teenagers are pack animals. Young people are pack animals. They like to be social. And the 1970s were very social times. We lived at kind of a blessed time, because we did not have, it was before AIDS. It was before a lot of the scary stuff that came along when my kids were growing up. And I would say that the best thing that young people can have is human personal connection to other people, and to not let technology get in the way of that, and to go out into the world and get what you need from there, find out about it, learn about it, and be strong in it, and make sure that you have a meaningful life, that you choose a meaningful life. That's what I'm going to
Me.
bring to my granddaughters. You know, they're only 2 now, but
Mhm.
I am still teaching them now to you know, be brave, be careful, but be brave.
Be brave and to have a meaningful life for
Mhm.
sure. Miss Cinda, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your books?
Yes, I would love if your listeners were interested in what they've heard to go to Amazon.com or my publisher, GreyGoosePress.com, where you'll be able to find my 3 most recent historical novels.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Cinda Gault because if you support her, for sure, more and more empowering books like this to come. So, Miss Cinda, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you too, Daniel.
More to come, people. See you soon.
Bye bye.